5 things they won't tell you about coma. We do know that every day around the world, thousands of the sickest hospital patients are placed into medically induced comas. It's been standard practice for the past 50 years. But there are things that they're not telling us. Number 1. Comas are rarely necessary. Coma has become the go-to procedure for all manner of critically ill patients. These days, it's almost automatic. But the textbooks are clear about this. There are only a handful of instances where they actually recommend placing a patient into a medically induced coma. For instance, when the brain's suffering a seizure, they will shut down the brain to minimise long-term damage. Or, if the patient has certain types of wounds, they will try to keep them as still as possible. So they deeply sedate them. And with certain complications following heart surgery, the brain uses up a lot of oxygen and they may wish to divert that to the heart. So they switch the brain off. But these are only for short periods, hours or perhaps days. Few would argue with this. And yet many doctors will place patients into the deepest coma states, not just for days or weeks, but for months at a time, not understanding what's happening to the body and the mind, seemingly deaf and blind to the damage they leave behind. They do this because they think it's the best thing for the patient. But they're wrong, very wrong. Only they won't believe it. It's time they brought themselves up to speed.
I spent the first 2 months after my coma convinced I'd died. And still, I have to check I am actually alive. I tell people I was in my coma for 80 years because that's what happened. I think my nightmares were my personal hell. They were as real as I stand here today.
2. Most doctors ignore current guidelines. Most doctors would tell you that no patient can tolerate being conscious while on a mechanical ventilator. It's something they all seem to believe. They tell us that the patient will fight the vent, that they will gag and choke. But this is not so. When done correctly, even the sickest of patients can tolerate the procedure while conscious. And this is what all current medical literature recommends, to keep the patients alert and mobile. There are strict warnings against the practice of prolonged deep sedation, and yet it remains standard practice all over the world. 3. Comas kill. Terrible things happen when a person is placed into a medically induced coma for weeks or months at a time. The body will begin to deteriorate very rapidly. Muscles waste, nerves disconnect, joints calcify. The lack of genuine sleep will lead to acute brain failure, and not everyone will survive. Prolonged deep sedation is proven to lead to higher mortality. A wealth of medical literature bears this out. Hunt all you like, but you won't find a single medical textbook that's up to date and recommends rendering a patient utterly senseless for prolonged periods of time, regardless of the illness. They know that such practices can be lethal. The statistics bear this out.
If someone came now to put me in a coma, I'd be like, get away from me. I would sooner die than let that happen again. Coma, is so dramatic, so barbaric that it's happening at all.
4. Coma survivors are never the same again. Most of those who survive the coma experience will suffer a remarkably similar and serious decline in their mental and physical well-being, regardless of why they were placed into the coma in the first place. Tens of points can be knocked off a person's IQ. Memory is often shot to pieces. And physically, It's like they've aged decades. These are clearly hospital-acquired conditions known collectively as post-intensive care syndrome. Many coma survivors wish that they'd never returned. Others question if they're alive or dead or still trapped inside their coma.
Part of me is still on that bed, intubated. Am I really awake, or is this part of a long-term coma dream? Because everything since then has been strange and glitchy, so just off. Right, but not right. Things seem staged. People look like actors. Everything has a sinister feel.
5. Coma events are real. Most doctors will tell you that inside a medically induced coma, you're experiencing the deepest, most restorative form of sleep. And you won't dream. You can't, because your brain's been switched off. So there's nothing to remember. But this isn't so. Inside a medically induced coma, people experience all manner of events that feel even more real than our current reality. People go back in time, often far back in this life, revisiting their childhood and other key events. Some people find themselves in heaven. They experience nothing but joy and universal love.
It was such a mind-blowing, amazing experience. I was surrounded by the purest of untainted love in my coma. I miss it so much. It was enlightening and awe-inspiring, and not a love found anywhere on this earth. The love was flawless and completely pure, and it filled me.
Others find themselves in hell, trapped in nightmare worlds that defy the imagination, often caught in loops so odd, so strange, that many coma survivors are left to question their sanity. And then there are the alternate lives spanning decades while mere weeks pass in this world. Lives little different from ours, rich in every detail, and every bit as real.
The 2 weeks I was in a coma felt to me like 20 years. I lived a whole other life while I was under. So much so that when I finally was brought back to this world, realm, dimension, or whatever you want to call it, I was actually sad I was awake and didn't get to see how my other life there played out. I literally missed it. The people, the experiences, the things I learned. I feel these emotions very strongly to this day.
Doctors call these events delirium, hallucinations and false memories, but they're wrong. The things that coma survivors tell us today echo down the ages. They see the things that the sages and the mystics have been reporting since the dawn of time, and doctors simply don't know what to say. So they avoid the subject. But there are real answers to be had, and they are available now. Modern medicine wants to see an end to prolonged deep sedation. If you've been in a coma or know someone who has, this may help you join the dots. For the full story, seek out the book or audiobook, Coma, a near-death experience, the beautiful, disturbing and dangerous world of the unconscious, by Alan and Beverley Pearce.